how did all that come about? I mean, where did it even start?
We were going to get SNP profiles, and I know that the state waited until they had the FBI profiles available to give us the SNP from Optum.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you.
Listen to Pavarotti. Can I be your superhero?
Now we get to kind of a 50-50 thing. I think there's probably 50% of the courts throughout the United States that would have suppressed a lot of evidence in this case, enough so that a conviction may never be obtained. And, you know, if anybody doubts me, or they're like, that Cyray guy, he's crazy, he's a conspiracy theorist. If you don't believe me, all you have to do is simply Google Jeffrey Nye, Fox News. And Jeffrey Nye is one of the AG, the attorney generals in Idaho, who did all of the oral arguments in court as it relates to the DNA evidence in this case. And if you listen to that interview, he'll tell you firsthand, everything was at stake on the DNA. If they lost the DNA, everything that comes behind it would have been gone. And he'll tell you that's a lot of evidence. That's all the cell phone records. It's all the Celebrite extracts. It's everything. And then he'll go on to tell you that they didn't even argue for some other exception to that rule, to the fruit of the poisonous tree, if you will, because it didn't exist. So, you know, you have a major player on the prosecution side who's telling you, when we went into court to argue that we felt the IGG would be upheld, the legal process in which we got it, we knew we were risking everything. And, you know, I think that's really important for people to understand, because I don't believe the IGG was done properly. I think that we have a lot of issues. I think technology has outpaced our ability to understand what's happening with evidence today.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Why should I permit evidence obtained potentially by searching databases that by its own policies law enforcement said they wouldn't search?
So a couple points on that. First, even assuming that that's all correct and that they violated the terms,
seems to be the evidence.
The terms of service, Your Honor, don't affect the Fourth Amendment.
Welcome to another hard-hitting edition of The Revealing. In today's video, we're going to try to finally get some answers in this cryptic case. And to do that, we're going to welcome to the stage none other than defense attorney Ann Taylor. And we'll later be joined by district attorney who assisted in prosecuting this case, none other than Mr. Nye. But first, I'm going to start with you, Ann. It seems like the entire case against Bryan Kohberger revolved around this cryptic DNA thing that mainly focused on the investigative genetic genealogy. And I know there was a lot of back and forth on this particular issue. And can you tell me in your words, what was the nature in which the prosecution was trying to hide manipulated evidence as it related to the IGG? I mean, how could you have possibly figured out even what the case was against Kohberger, considering, you know, Othram had the IGG and then FBI had the IGG and then things happened and you couldn't get to see it ever. But how did all that come about? I mean, where did it even start?
We were going to get SNP profiles, and I know that the state waited until they had the FBI profiles available to give us the SNP from Optum.
Well, let me ask you this. When you did finally receive the SNP profile from Othram Labs, did it tell you everything you needed to know?
I think that there's missing information from the Othram profile.
Well, then I've got to ask, I mean, if there's missing information from the main piece of evidence in the entire case, I mean, the evidence that the entire case hinges upon, and you can't get it, and there's something missing, I mean, wouldn't you expect the court to throw that evidence out or suppress it, or at least give you the information that was missing? I mean, what were you expecting the court to do?
I would not expect a court to make decisions about Othram without having the full scope. It's just been a long road for us to get information.
Well, and we all know what happened from there. You finally did get all the information from Othram, and then you got the snip from the FBI that actually led to Kohberger, because the Othram snip didn't lead to Kohberger. And the FBI snip, though, was double the size of Othram, and then they would never give you the paper trail to explain how the FBI doubled their snip size. We all have our, thoughts and opinions about how that happened. But let's bring in Jeff Nye, district attorney that prosecuted the case along with Bill Thompson, Ashley Jennings, among others, Jeff Hurwitz. Now, maybe he can shed a light on, some of the questions that we've all had in this case. Welcome, Jeff Nye. Hey, Jeff, how you doing? I'm glad that you agreed to join us here, and I just have a few questions for you, and maybe you can give us some clarification about this case. And the first question is, why was the district attorney office even helping Bill Thompson with this case? It's two different offices, right?
Our office took over anything that was really focused more on the law and less maybe on the specific facts of the case, because we weren't there for the investigation like Bill was. And so some of the topics that we handled were, after there was an indictment, they moved to dismiss that indictment, and we handled the briefing and argument on that. We handled the change of venue. We handled my personal role, my biggest role probably in the case, was handling all of the briefing and argument related to investigative genetic genealogy. That was a new issue in Idaho, and so it was a pretty big deal. And so Bill asked me to kind of step in and take that on.
So I guess the obvious question for everybody out there, Bill, is without the IGG, was there ever any real chance of securing a conviction against Brian Kohberger?
In this case, because the investigative genetic genealogy is how they identified the defendant, that would have meant virtually everything. The stakes couldn't have been higher with respect to the evidence pointing to the defendant. If you watch, when I did the oral argument in that, Judge Hippler, his very last question to me was, Mr. Nye, if the FBI did in fact violate Mr. Kohberger's constitutional rights, you would agree that that would burden the state?
Now, I remember that part of the hearing when the judge said that. I may not have realized, I knew it was a big deal, but I may not have realized just how big of a deal it really was. Let's go back and take a look at that first, and then I've got another question about it.
The FBI, in fact, violated the Fourth Amendment rights of Mr. Kohberger. You would agree the state is burdened by that?
That's a great way of putting it, Your Honor. Yes, the state would be burdened by that. Yes.
Now, what did you understand Judge Hippler to mean when he asked you that question in that hearing?
Judge Hippler, his very last question to me was, Mr. Nye, if the FBI did in fact violate Mr. Kohberger's constitutional rights, you would agree that that would burden the state, is the way he phrased it. And what I understood him to be asking, and what I believe he was asking was, you agree with me that if I find that this was a violation of the Constitution, you lose everything, pointing to the defendant? And I said yes. So that the stakes were pretty high on that one.
So are you literally saying that that one decision right there was literally the difference between Brian Kohberger spending the rest of his life in prison and Brian Kohberger being a free man? Is that what you're saying?
So the way I would say it is, it was essential to the case. I think something you need to understand about the investigative genetic genealogy is this was an issue of first impression in Idaho. So no court had addressed a constitutional challenge to the use of investigative genetic genealogy. And when the defense moved for that in this case, everyone understood that what they were seeking was to try and keep the DNA out of the trial. But I don't know that everyone fully understood that the way the Fourth Amendment works, if the state were to lose that argument, you don't just lose the evidence itself, you lose anything that came from that evidence. You may have heard the phrase fruit of the poisonous tree.
Yeah, we certainly understand fruit of the poisonous tree, but let me just dive in here just a little bit deeper because I need to make sure that I understand what you're saying, because this isn't what I understood. This is what I speculated, but it's not what I understood. Can you explain in a little bit more detail how it was the genetic genealogy that was the entire investigation into Brian Kohberger, and without it, you didn't have a case?
The way they found him was the DNA that was on the knife sheath. There was single source male DNA. They didn't have anyone they could connect to that DNA, so they didn't have anyone to test to compare it to. Traditionally, when you're doing DNA testing in the criminal world, you have an individual, you have the DNA from the item, and you can compare those two things. Here they had DNA, but they didn't have the individual. So how do you find them? Well, that's where investigative genetic genealogy comes in. And they literally they reverse engineer a genetic family tree to figure out who could this person be. And then they get a warrant to arrest that person. Now they have the person and they can compare it to the DNA. And so because that's the way they used to find the defendant in this case, all of the evidence was fruit of those actions. And so again, if we had lost that motion, it would have been devastating to the case.